This program is sponsored by the Kavli Foundation based in Los Angeles, California. The Kavli Foundation is dedicated to advancing science for the benefit of humanity, and it comes from such a personal place that's so enticing. As an acclaimed prize-winning magazine editor, you leave your job and you commit to being a painter.
That's right.
And you weren't satisfied. Why weren't you satisfied with your painting?
Well, because I was a terrible painter.
But you were obsessed with it nevertheless.
I was. So, I had a career working in a group as an editor does and finding it enormously creatively satisfying. But I had this, yen to try to make images myself, but I had no background in it. So I was kind of starting as a fairly advanced adult from scratch, and I had ambitions. Like I think most people have ambitions. I had ambitions. I thought, well, maybe I'll be really good at this, and then I found that no matter how hard I tried, and I did try hard, that I couldn't get much beyond mediocre. And I recognized that, you can acquire skills if you work hard enough at it. There was something fundamental I didn't understand, and that was how artists think. So I set about writing a book. Actually, at the beginning, it wasn't even a book. It was just set about having conversations with artists about how they thought, and particularly how they worked through their feelings of doubt and frustration. Which I came to realize was kind of the heart of the artist's work.
The idea that you weren't satisfied with it. You talk in your book about the nature of that dissatisfaction, which is not that you couldn't represent things well. You got good at that.
Pretty good.
But the idea that you wanted to go deeper than that, you were looking for what I guess was the difference between craft and art.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That I was getting better at craft. I mean, you get better at craft. Craft is practice. But I was not able to break through to what felt meaningful to me.
How would you know you had broken through? What are you looking for that makes it art in your mind?
I think that you connect to a piece of work. I mean, you must know this from your own experience. In a kind of disembodied way, you can appreciate whether it matters to you anyway. Whether you can, I can look at a painting that I do, and is it producing interest in me? Really, I look at it, and am I tempted to look at it for more than 30 seconds? I mean, also, do I recoil? Because that is another thing that happens. But even if the painting is pretty good, and I'm not fundamentally engaged with it, and I have made paintings that have attached to me that way, but they're not predictable. They're not the norm. They're very infrequent, and I just found that endlessly frustrating.
So you made this decision to interview, I think, over 40 artists in very different fields.
Yeah. Well, I began to think that maybe there was some connection across genres about the way that artists thought. So I interviewed novelists and poets and sculptors and painters and architects and joke writers on a television show, and sandcastle builders and food makers, but fundamentally artists the way we think about artists, and tried to understand their path from passing notion to finished thought, finished work, with all the torture in between. And as a side hustle of the book, it wasn't the main object, but tried to see whether there were actually similarities in the way people understood the way they create. What was interesting to me, of course, is that very few people think about the way they create. They're superstitious about it. They fear trying to understand it too much because they think that the magic will somehow disappear and they'll be unable to do that. So it was an interesting struggle of my own in this book to try to get people who were as interested as I was in interrogating where creativity comes from. And I did. And I had these, 43 conversations many of them were conversations over a long period of time about how, the subtitle of the book is how something comes from nothing. And that's what I was exploring.
That feeling of magic happening when suddenly it clicks.
Yeah.
Some people ascribe that to getting it from the spirit world.
Yeah.
To me, it's always been the unconscious.
Yeah, well, I'm with you pretty much on that. That's how I think about it. But it kind of doesn't matter whether you're talking about it coming from a, divine strike or whether it's coming from the unconscious.
It feels magical because of that feeling that you don't know where it came from. Sometimes I felt like I was an antenna.
Right.
But it was an antenna not to a radio station outside my head, but to somewhere inside my head that I'm not in direct connection with.
Right, but I think that's it's a meaningless distinction because it's in many ways they're all talking about the same thing. They're talking about this thing that they cannot understand and that they're very nervous about. I mean, one of the things that was constantly fascinating to me was how superstitious they all were. I mean, a lot of them are very kind of rational, heady, intellectual types, and yet they were all into the mumbo jumbo of trying to trick their mind, because going to that place is very, very difficult, and your brain is built to prevent you from doing that. It's built to sort of sabotage those efforts because it's trying to protect you.
Tell me about that. How do you see that?
I mean, I'm not a expert on this by any means, but as I understand it, your brain cuts grooves, basically, and to override those grooves is difficult. I mean, one simple thing that really kind of everybody did was give themselves explicit permission to fail. So they create, there's this phrase that is used in creativity, which is the vomit phase, where you just basically just open your head up to whatever impulses you have and you try to be as uncritical of them as possible. And, sometimes it's as simple as writing, if you're a writer, writing in longhand rather than typing, so that you kind of think that the exercise itself is not real, that it's not even really a draft. It's just, it's just you kind of nattering or doodling. However, it's very important to the process, because if you don't allow yourself to do that, you are never in a position to evaluate what it is that your brain has spewed out. I think of creative expression in some ways very simply as an imagining stage, a judging stage, and a shaping stage.
Yeah. That really sounds like it. The most vivid example of that I heard from Norman Lear, who told me that for a long time he was very critical of everything he put down.
Yeah.
In the first putting down of it.
Yeah.
He put it down when he put it down.
Yeah. Yes.
And one time he locked himself in a hotel room for 10 days so he could get a first draft out. And at the end of 10 days, all he had was one sentence that he had rewritten hundreds of times. He might have been exaggerating, but he said he was taken out on a stretcher. And with the therapist's help, he developed the idea of making his first rough draft by dictating into a tape recorder and not allowing himself to go back and look at anything or listen to anything.
I think that's exactly right. And, one way or another, like the novelist George Saunders, a great novelist, he wrote a book that I talk about in my book called Lincoln in the Bardo. And it's a work that frustrated him for years. He tried it as a short story. He tried it as a play. He wrote on top of the play, "Run away, don't touch this," because it was so vexing to him. And then finally he had a book of short stories coming out, and there was this little moment when he kind of had nothing to do while he was waiting for the book to be published. And he just gave himself permission to write something that he was absolutely willing to throw away and that he expected to throw away at some level. And the permission to fail is the thing that allows that thing that Norman Lear was unable to do in that hotel room. It enables your brain to just kind of move without the inhibitions that, for instance, I feel very much as a painter, and and is at the heart of what this book was trying to understand is how do these people live without inhibitions? I don't get that. And yet what they do is that they find a way to trick themselves into spewing. And then there's this judging stage, which is, I'm sure Norman Lear had this as well, which is that you are able to actually look at what you've produced. And that is really that sort of communication between impulse and rigor, is that place in between. And your ability to navigate that evaluation is really, I came to think, was so crucial to the process, and in some ways the difference between a successful artist and not. Twyla Tharp had this great, she's another artist in my book, the choreographer Twyla Tharp, had this great expression that you have to look at what you've done and you have to learn to be not you.
I look at it as a way to be subjectively you in the first phase.
Yes.
And in the second phase, objectively the reader.
Absolutely.
Play the part of the reader. What is this? What's going on here? Why is he telling me all this?
Right. And my book is made up of not just these conversations, but also what I call artifacts of the creative process. So notes and doodles and outlines and little sort of coarse sketches. I mean, I love the way that these things look. And in fact, at one point, the book was just going to be like this. It was going to be a kind of museum of iterative art, which I think is so interesting and beautiful. But the main thing I came to realize was that these artifacts were, in fact, a method by which the artist was able to talk to themselves. They were able to take what was in their brain, what their impulsive brain had created, and to start to make sense of it, usually to simplify it, to simplify by drawing or repetitive writing or some kind of concrete method of understanding, of translating. There's this phrase that really, I can't believe how many artists used in one form or another, where they said they were listening to a character. They had to find out what their character wanted from the book. Tony Kushner, who's a very rational person, said he had to ask one of his main characters, Lewis, what the book was about, and then he just took dictation. There's a wonderful visual artist named Cheryl Pope in the book, and she had to ask this figure that she created on a canvas whether she wanted a face or not. This kind of language, which seems so kind of cliche, silly to me at first, I began to think was actually really crucial.
So this is some of the work that goes into getting the art to surface.
Mm-hmm.
I was really interested in your conversation with Stephen Sondheim, where his view of the craft of lyric writing is a lot like a puzzle.
Yeah.
Because he loved puzzles.
Yeah.
And the idea that working out the puzzle of the lyric, somehow he trusts that a deeper meaning will emerge.
Yeah, I found that fascinating as well. I mean, a lot of that stage of art making is really about solving problems. So that the game playing that he was so expert at, he spent all his life as a great lover of puzzles and of games. That game playing is very analogous in a lot of ways to the last stage of art making. It's like you set up a grid, in a sense, and you have to try to solve the grid. The grid is the structure that you've created for the work, and you have to solve it. And Stephen Sondheim was almost literal in that he created a structure, and then he had bunches of rhymes and words. He has this wonderful set of books called Look, I Made a Hat, and Finishing the Hat, and Look, I Made a Hat. And in them, he has these great legal pads full of alternate rhymes for all of his songs. And you can actually see him, it's very much like looking at a crossword puzzle solution. You could see him try to sort of work through all these things. And yet, the thing about Stephen Sondheim is that his work, as you just said, his work is just full of the deepest and most primitive kind of emotion, which would seem to be almost a contradiction to the
rigor of puzzle making.
The rigor of puzzle solving. Yeah, absolutely. And yet he understood from his years and years of doing it, that's the way he could work. And I think in some ways, it's the way everybody works.
It's all an effort to find what is just under the surface. You can smell it.
Yeah.
But you don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But you want to bring it up.
You want to bring it up, and then you want to understand it. You want to give yourself a methodology, all of what, everyone had different methodologies for understanding what that thing that you're describing is.
I was struck by that description of Paul McCartney finding yesterday.
Yeah.
Because when I interviewed him on this podcast, I asked him how he found this unforgettable melody for yesterday.
Famously, he wrote the word scrambled eggs as instead of the word.
That's right. That's right. But I said, how do you find these melodies? And he said, well, I play oobly chords. I don't know what an oobly chord is.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I asked him, I said, what does that mean? He said, oobly. I didn't ask him how to spell it even. But he said,
that's great.
And this was thrilling. He said, look, there's a piano over there. Let me show you what I mean. And he started to play oobly chords.
Wow. He wrote a song right in front of you.
I said, is this going to be a song? He said, no, I don't think so.
Well, that's a wonderful thing. That's a great, that's what in this documentary, this Let It Be documentary, you actually see it happening in real time. In recorded real time, but you actually see him riff on the chords to the song Get Back. It's incredible. And no one had ever seen that before. To see the emergence, like right before your eyes, of how something is created. And that was also a big source of inspiration for this book.
When we come back from our break, I talk with Adam Moss about how the artists he interviewed were able to push through their inevitable setbacks and failures. The key? Obsession. This program is sponsored by the Kavli Foundation, dedicated to advancing science for the benefit of humanity. The Foundation's mission is to stimulate scientific research in astrophysics, theoretical physics, nanoscience, and neuroscience, to strengthen the relationship between science and society, and to honor scientific discoveries with the Kavli Prize. This is Clear and Vivid, and now back to my conversation with Adam Moss. What other areas did the people you interviewed, what did they say they go through? Was obsession mentioned much?
Yes. Oh, obsession was mentioned always. If you think of the act, as I sort of mentioned before, of art being persevering through failure, James Joyce has this great, great quote, which is, talent is insignificant. He said, beyond talent lie all the usual words, discipline, love, luck, but most of all, endurance. And that's so great, because what a lot of these artists were telling me was that they found ways to endure. And what fuels that kind of stamina and that endurance? One of the big things that fuels it is obsession and obsessive interest. I did find that, good ideas, I think they occur kind of all the time, but not every idea can obsess you. And what these people were telling me is that they hooked into the ideas that would not let them go. And that became the kind of fuel for the endurance that they needed. Another thing like that is simple faith. They did deep down. They're all kind of, many of them are grumpy and curmudgeonly in various ways, but they all had a fundamental optimism. They all felt deep down that they could produce the thing that they saw in their mind. Not exactly, but they could get there, which is something that really, again, also back to my own failed efforts at painting, was something that I didn't have. And you need it. You need to believe. You need an ego that is strong enough to withstand all the battering it takes to get to the other side.
You think that obsession applies to each individual work or to the overall body of work?
I think
sometimes should you say this is going to lead into more blind alleys.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it away.
Yeah, but it's really seldom that they do put it away. I put things away all the time, and I just was amazed by the numbers of times people would describe to me monumental catastrophes that would have defeated any ordinary mortal. And these people just kept persevering. And they persevered because they sort of, as frustrating as it might have been at the moment, they saw the end. They saw where they were going. It was kind of amazing, really.
What other avenues did they approach that come to mind?
They allowed themselves a lot of dithering. And then at a certain point, they would have to lock in and commit themselves to what they were making. It was very important for them to understand the moment when they were actually engaged with the project, and they would move from one phase to another. I mean, that's the thing. Particularly making art at this level is very, very hard. You have to, you have to endure so much doubt and tedium and other things that defeat interest. And these people found various ways to get through all that kind of negative barrage. I kept thinking of it almost like a video game where something's coming at you, trying to blast you out of the screen. And they're able to navigate it. And then there is a point when they say, okay, I'm ready. That's a kind of almost conscious commitment that they make to the project.
There's so much about this that is a mystery. Every step along the way that we've been talking.
Yeah.
It feels like it's coming from outer space when you get the solution. To get it to mean more, it comes from some unknown place.
Well, how do you understand your ability to act? Did you think about that much? Do you think about that much? Or is it just something you kind of accepted blindly?
It's funny. I think I make up a new method every time I act.
Uh-huh.
I guess in that way I'm an eternal amateur.
No, no, I think you're an innovator.
Maybe that. But I don't have one way to do it. And the same is true with writing. I do more writing than acting now.
Yeah.
But that thing of being obsessed with it,
Yep.
not knowing where it comes from. During COVID, I couldn't sleep, and I heard two people in the back of my head talking, and they were saying really weird things and interesting things. So when I got up in the morning, I wrote it down. The next night, they went on with it.
How lucky for you.
And then I started to nudge them a little bit, but that wasn't good. It was better to let them have their own conversation.
Yeah.
And it turned into a sort of a one-act play that I now don't know what to do with because I'm out of touch with these two people now.
Now it's your job. They're finished. They did their work. Now it's up to you.
How dare they?
That's great. I mean, it was interesting to me also in this sort of search, how many people got their great ideas in dreams. Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, dreamed the most enduring sort of tableau image.
The angel coming.
The angel coming through the ceiling.
Yeah.
It just popped into his head in a dream. And then he followed that dream into, this kind of labyrinth of other things around it. But that central image came to him, and that was his unconscious talking, just like we have been talking about. And, he woke up and he remembered it, and he also realized what use he could make of it, which is a very, I think I'll speak for myself, ordinary mortals can't really do. We can't really understand. We do get these bolts of lightning, but we don't know what to do with them. And the thing about these artists is that they have a productive understanding of the kinds of things that we just let slip away.
That seems so important. To know what to do with the signal that you get. You're getting somebody down in the dark doing hand signals.
Right.
You can't read them. You don't know what, but it means something.
Yes.
The scientist who was trying to figure out the structure of, I think, the molecule for benzene dreamt of a snake in a circle biting its own tail. Now, if an amateur would say, well, don't go where there are snakes. You're obviously afraid of snakes. But that turned out to be the shape of the molecule.
Oh, how great. I mean, the mind is miraculous. And it's just sending smoke signals or whatever. It's sending images to you. It's working all the time. And a lot of what scientists you mentioned and the artists in my book, it's an active translation of understanding of a certain kind of scrutiny of their own brains. That's really, I don't know, to me, I'm in just in awe of it.
I love what you said. When you asked Sondheim, does he ever think of redoing lyrics years later?
Yeah.
And he said that wonderful thing. He says, I'm walking around and I say, suddenly I've got it. He said, if you're trying, it doesn't work. But if you're doing
Right.
something else,
Right.
it'll come to you.
Yeah, that's one of the ways I think, one of the ways you trick yourself. For some reason, I included a crossword puzzle in the book because at the beginning it was basically about these visual artifacts, and I really liked the look of an edited crossword puzzle. It's just beautiful to me as a kind of scrolled on grid. And yet it was actually very relevant as it turned out. And Will Shortz, the editor of the crossword puzzle at the New York Times, what he said to me was he just reminded me, you walk away, you start a puzzle, you walk away. You start a puzzle, you can't figure it out. You walk away, then you figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's actually not any different than what Stephen Sondheim is talking about.
That's so
Yes.
true.
Yes.
Yeah, I have that same experience.
But you have to release your brain from the pressure to solve the problem right there, because that's where the brain starts to lock. And these are all ways to unlock the brain.
So now the big obvious question, how has talking to all these people and getting all this insight into their process, how has it changed the way you paint?
Well, it hasn't changed the painting, but it has completely changed the experience of my painting. Because one thing I realized is that being creative in a certain way has a lot to do with personality aspects. It has a lot to do with, like, I'm 5'8", I'm not 6'2", I'm right-handed, not left-handed. There are certain things I'm kind of born with. And I'm not born with the focus that you need to do this kind of work. I'm not born with the ability to glide back and forth between my imagination and my rigorous self. I don't have certain aspects that might make me actually a better artist. But, and this was just a super interesting aspect of what I learned, is that almost everybody that I talked to they were all indifferent to the project they were working on. They didn't really care. They worked on something and then it was finished and they felt relief, they felt exhaustion, but they didn't feel any specific satisfaction from the making of a thing. What they felt satisfaction from was the work itself. And that's something that anyone can take heart in. And that's something that I took heart in, because I realized that if I really enjoyed the making of something, it didn't matter whether I enjoyed the painting itself. So I became almost liberated I make a little mark in a painting that feels completely satisfying to me in that moment. I can enjoy that. I can love that. And I surrendered my need to be great. And I was just fine with being good, or okay even.
This sounds like from talking to these people, you've learned something about the art of living.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons in that. Yes. Yes.
That's extraordinary. It sounds self-helpy, but it also sounds real.
Yeah, I think that's true. Both of those things are true. I mean, I call the book the work of art, and I guess it's a fun pun, but it's also really what the book is about. It's about the joy in the work itself and the power of work. And I think that's a lesson for living as well as a lesson for making anything.
So do you think that as you do the work, giving up the pressure of the expectation that it has to be great, you must dive into art, you can't be satisfied with any less, giving up that pressure actually opens the door, a crack to art?
It certainly opens the crack to love. To loving the thing you're doing and to the experience of the experience of joy in it. Whether it ultimately makes you a better artist, I don't know. Jury's still out on me, so I'll let you know.
I look forward to hearing. Meanwhile, our time is running out, and we always end every show with 7 quick questions.
Okay.
They're roughly, in a strange way, roughly to do with communication. Of all the things that there are to understand, what do you wish you really understood?
Well, one of the hopeless tasks of this book was to understand why there is such a thing as talent, and to understand why some people have talent and others don't. And I began to think ultimately that was a ridiculous question, because everybody said, why do you ask that? It's just that, some people are this and some people are that. Your sort of fixation on what talent is, people just thought it was weird. However, the thing I wish I really understood after spending 2 years with this book is what is talent? I don't know. And I want to know.
How do you tell someone they have their facts wrong?
I think you pretend that
they're not stupid.
That they're not stupid, and you say to them, "Oh, that's so interesting. The way that I understand it is blah blah blah," giving them the correct facts, but without actually challenging them on the facts that they've told you.
There's always the chance that they're not stupid.
Yeah, and it's always a chance that maybe you got your facts wrong too.
Right.
So.
Right. What's the strangest question anyone has ever asked you?
You know how you go to a cocktail party and someone comes up to you and, thinking that they're going to start a conversation, says, "Who are you?" I find that absolutely perplexing, because I take it literally. It's not just a kind of conversational, gambit. It's like, okay, who am I? And how can I answer that sufficiently in the middle of this loud cocktail party?
I've never been asked that, but that's a puzzler. How do you deal with a compulsive talker?
Oh my God, I wish I was better at this. I would say I just withdraw. I just, space out, and I kind of leave the conversation in anything but body. But I'm not proud of that answer.
Let's say you're at a dinner table and you're sitting next to someone you've never met. How do you begin a genuine conversation?
I think I would start with something super concrete, and I would say, what did you do today? Because that would get them, I would get a sense of what their kind of quotidian experience is, and I'd find something in that that might lead me to something interesting and maybe even deep or real.
Okay, next to last. What gives you confidence?
I feel confidence personally when I feel that the person I'm talking to is genuinely interested in what I have to say. When I feel their enthusiasm, and I feel a kind of current that is happening between us, that feels like we're one unit and we're feeding off each other, and it's thrilling. And that gives me a personal set of confidence. Is that kind of confidence you mean? Or do you mean confidence that the world is not going to blow up?
It could be any. Do you have any confidence in that?
I try. I try to be an optimist at heart. Oh my God, it's hard.
Last question.
Yeah.
What book changed your life?
I think the answer to that question is it could be a number of them, but I'll go with Winnie the Pooh, because I will say
you got to explain this.
That it is a book that hooked me on reading. A book that I read when I was very, very young, and there were many I could substitute, that gave me the love of reading, and that has changed my life.
I have the same answer. It's the first book-length thing I read when I was 8 years old. It made me want to be a writer.
And what was that?
Top Horse at Crescent Ranch. And I started my own novel, which was, I think, a page and a half long. but I was always for the underdog. So the title of mine was Not the Top Horse at Crescent Ranch.
That's great. Now, do you still have it?
I don't have my version. Somebody sent me a copy of the actual book. Yeah.
And have you read it as an adult?
I haven't.
Uh-huh.
It
would be interesting.
Yeah, maybe I'll be able to finish the book. Not the top horse.
Right. Underdog will triumph.
Yeah, right. This has been so much fun talking with you about such an important topic because it really touches all of us.
Well, thank you. It was a great experience to take the last 3 years to learn, and then to try to find a way to communicate what I learned. Because I agree. I think it's very important. It's very interesting, and I feel changed by it. So
it's probably something that AI writing a book can't do.
I hope that's true.
Thank you for today.
Thank you, Alan.
This has been Clear and Vivid. At least I hope so. My thanks to the Kavli Foundation for sponsoring this episode. The Kavli Foundation is dedicated to advancing science for the benefit of humanity. Adam Moss won many awards as the editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, and from 2004 to 2019 as editor-in-chief of New York Magazine. His new book, The Work of Art, How Something Comes from Nothing, is full of drafts, sketches, and scribbled notebook pages from the artists he profiles, making the book itself a work of art. This episode was edited and produced by our executive producer, Graham Chedd, with help from our associate producer, Jean Chimay. Our publicist is Sarah Hill. Our researcher is Elizabeth O'Haney, and the sound engineer is Erica Huang. The music is courtesy of the Stefan Koenig Trio. Next in our series of conversations, I talk with Craig Venter. In what many in the genetics community at the time labeled a brazen stunt, in the 1990s he launched a privately funded effort to beat the federally funded project to sequence the first human genome. And then in 2000, he shared the stage with then NIH Director Francis Collins in announcing the first draft of the complete DNA sequence of a human. For much of the past 20 years, he's been roaming the world's oceans in his yacht, sampling the DNA from the literally billions of microorganisms that live there, largely undetected.
In fact, we discovered more life in the oceans than all the planets and stars in the universe. It's amazing. You can look at that water and it looks like pure crystal clear water. It's before the tools that we developed of shotgun sequencing, the world of microbiology was seen either through the lens of a microscope or by what would grow in culture. And it turns out probably 99% of the life forms on the planet won't grow in the existing culture conditions that scientists used. So they assumed it didn't exist because they couldn't see it.
Craig Venter, next time on Clear and Vivid. For more details about Clear and Vivid and to sign up for my newsletter, please visit alanalda.com. And you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Clear and Vivid. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.